I sacrificed 5 years of my life and $50,000 to put my fiancé through medical school. But at his graduation gala, as I stood there holding a custom engraved stethoscope, just for him, he took the microphone and introduced another woman as his future wife. When I stepped forward, he did not apologize. He called security and told the crowd I was just a delusional former roommate. He had no idea that his ultimate betrayal was exactly what I needed to destroy his entire future. My name is Isabella, and at 33 years old, I never expected to be publicly humiliated by the man I loved. I work as a high-end medical tech recruiter, a career that demands sharp instincts and endless hours. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who used you and threw you away. The crystal chandeliers of the Oak Ridge Country Club cast a warm golden glow over the graduation party. The room hummed with the sound of clinking champagne flutes, soft string music, and the low, confident chatter of wealthy families. I stood near a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a medical caduceus, holding a small velvet box in my hands. Inside the box rested a top-of-the-line Littman cardiology stethoscope. I had carefully arranged for his initials to be engraved on the bell, followed by the letters MD. It was a tangible symbol of everything we had worked for over the past 5 years. Looking around the lavish ballroom, I felt a deep sense of pride and exhaustion. I had spent the last half-decade working 80-hour weeks to build my medical tech recruiting agency from the ground up. My days consisted of endless phone calls, aggressive negotiations, and skipped lunches. My nights were spent reviewing spreadsheets and balancing budgets so I could pay the rent on the luxury condo my fiancé Carter insisted we needed. More than that, I had quietly written checks totaling $50,000 to cover his medical school tuition shortfalls, his expensive test prep materials, and his living expenses so he could focus entirely on his studies. I believed I was investing in our shared future. I believed we were a team. Carter was standing across the room, surrounded by a group of older, distinguished doctors. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, flashing that charismatic smile that had won my heart 5 years ago. I had stayed in the background for most of the evening, letting him network and bask in his achievement. His mother, Patricia, had explicitly told me earlier to stay out of the professional photographs. She claimed my simple cocktail dress clashed with the formal aesthetic they were going for, but I knew the real reason. Patricia came from generational wealth and had never hidden her disdain for my working-class background. She viewed my recruiting agency as blue-collar labor, completely unsuitable for a future doctor. I had swallowed her insults for years, always telling myself that once Carter graduated, we would finally establish our own boundaries. A sudden tapping sound brought my attention back to the center of the room. Carter was standing at the microphone on the small, raised stage, tapping his champagne glass with a silver spoon. The lively chatter of the country club gradually faded into an expectant silence. Everyone turned toward him, faces glowing with admiration. I moved slightly out of the shadows, clutching the velvet box, my heart swelling with anticipation. This was the moment. The culmination of all those sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the canceled vacations, and the drained savings accounts. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Carter began, his voice echoing smoothly through the speakers. "Medical school has been the most grueling, demanding journey of my life. There were nights I wanted to give up, nights I thought the pressure would break me, but I survived because I had an incredible support system." I smiled, stepping a little closer to the stage. I waited for my name. I waited for him to acknowledge the woman who had carried him across the finish line. "I could not have achieved this without my amazing parents," he continued, gesturing to Patricia and his father in the front row. "And more importantly, I could not have done this without the love, dedication, and unwavering support of my beautiful fiancé and future wife." My breath hitched in my throat. The words sounded perfect, exactly what I had dreamed of hearing. But Carter did not look in my direction. Instead, he reached out his hand toward the opposite side of the stage. A young, stunningly beautiful blonde woman in a designer silk gown stepped forward. She took his hand, beaming radiantly, as Carter pulled her close and kissed her cheek. To Brittany, Carter announced to the cheering crowd. The woman who kept me grounded, who inspired me, and who I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with. The room erupted in applause. People raised their glasses. Patricia clapped enthusiastically, blowing kisses to Brittany. Time seemed to stop completely. The air was sucked out of my lungs, leaving me paralyzed in the center of the ballroom. I stared at Carter, my mind violently rejecting what my eyes were seeing. Brittany was 24 years old. She was the daughter of the chief of surgery at the hospital where Carter had just matched for his residency. I had met her once at a hospital mixer, where Carter had casually introduced her as a mere acquaintance, a family friend he had to be polite to for networking purposes. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me. I looked at the faces in the crowd. Carter's family, his friends, his colleagues. They were all smiling. They were all clapping. They knew. Every single person in this room knew about Brittany. They had all been complicit in this elaborate, sickening lie. I had paid for his life, and he had used my money to fund a parallel relationship with a woman who could hand him his career on a silver platter. The applause began to die down, and that was when my paralysis broke. The velvet box in my hand suddenly felt like a lead weight. I stepped completely out of the shadows and walked directly toward the stage, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted around me, murmurs of confusion rippling through the guests as they noticed my approach. Carter looked down from the stage, his eyes finally locking onto mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of panic in his expression, a momentary break in his perfect facade. I waited for the guilt. I waited for him to stumble over his words, to try and explain, to show even a shred of remorse for destroying 5 years of my life. But Carter did not panic. He did not apologize. Instead, his features hardened into a mask of cold, calculated indifference. He maintained his grip on Brittany's waist, leaned into the microphone, and weaponized the entire room against me. "I apologize, everyone," Carter said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy and heavy condescension. "Please excuse the interruption. This is Isabella. She is a former roommate of mine. Unfortunately, she has been struggling with some severe mental health issues since I asked her to move out of my apartment last month. She has been having a hard time accepting reality." The gasps from the wealthy crowd hit me like physical blows. People took a step back from me, their eyes filled with alarm and pity. He had just erased 5 years of our lives together in 2 sentences. He had reduced my love, my financial support, and my entire existence to the delusions of an unstable squatter. "Could we get security over here, please?" Carter asked into the microphone, gesturing toward the back of the room. "She really should not be here. Please escort her out gently. She needs professional help." My mouth opened, but the sheer audacity of his lie robbed me of my voice. 2 large security guards in dark suits immediately detached themselves from the walls and began moving swiftly toward me. They closed the distance before I could even formulate a sentence to defend myself. I felt a heavy, firm hand grip my left arm, pulling me away from the stage. The security guard's thick fingers dug into my bare arm, pulling me backward with a sudden, jarring force. But before he could drag me toward the exit, Patricia stepped directly into my path. Carter's mother wore a tailored emerald green evening gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. She looked me up and down, her perfectly manicured hands resting lightly on a silver clutch. The vicious smile on her face was not born of shock or confusion. It was the deeply satisfied smile of a woman who had finally gotten exactly what she wanted. "Let go of her," Patricia commanded the guards. Her tone dripped with the casual, unquestionable authority of generational wealth. "I want to look at her before she leaves." The security guards hesitated for a fraction of a second, but loosened their grip. They stepped back just enough to give Patricia the floor, though they remained close enough to box me in. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. I could feel the eyes of hundreds of affluent guests burning into my back, their hushed whispers fading into a suffocating silence. Up on the stage, Carter remained exactly where he was. His arm was still securely wrapped around Brittany's waist, and he watched the scene unfold with a coward's profound relief. He had tossed me to the wolves and let his mother do the dirty work, just as he always did whenever things became uncomfortable. Patricia took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal champagne flute. Her gaze raked over my simple navy blue cocktail dress, her eyes lingering on the hemline with obvious disdain. "Do not make this uglier than your cheap dress, Isabella," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the dead silent room. "Security is already here to escort you off the premises. I strongly suggest you turn around and walk out quietly before you embarrass yourself any further." I stood my ground. I forced my breathing to remain even, refusing to let my shoulders slump or my hands tremble. "I am not the one who should be embarrassed right now, Patricia," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "Your son just announced an engagement to another woman while my ring is still on my finger. A ring, I might add, that I helped pay for." Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, mocking sound that echoed harshly off the vaulted ceilings of the country club. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving her free hand dismissively. "You were a convenient stepping stone, Isabella. Nothing more. We all knew it. Carter knew it. The only person entirely blind to the reality of this arrangement was you." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. She lowered her voice just enough to make the cruelty feel intimate, though it was still loud enough for the front row of guests to hear every single word. "You really thought working 80-hour weeks at some low-class temp agency made you a true partner in his success?" Patricia sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You thought paying his rent, buying his textbooks, and covering his grocery bills elevated your status in this family. It did not. It just made you useful for a certain period of time. I funded his entire medical school tuition," I stated calmly, holding her hostile gaze. "I sacrificed 5 years of my life so he could stand on that stage today without a dime of student debt. You paid for the privilege of being in his presence," Patricia shot back without missing a beat, her tone venomous. "Carter is a doctor now. He is entering a highly prestigious surgical residency at St. Luke's Medical Center. He needs a woman of high social pedigree by his side, not a glorified secretary who schedules interviews for a living." Patricia gestured gracefully toward the stage where Brittany was beaming next to Carter. "Look at Brittany. Look at who her father is. She is a woman of his caliber, born into the right circles with the right connections. You never belonged in our wealthy family, Isabella. You were just a temporary utility, and your utility has officially expired." The sheer cruelty of her words hung heavily in the air, absolute and unforgiving. I looked past Patricia to the stage. Carter was avoiding my gaze entirely. He was whispering something into Brittany's ear that made her giggle completely, ignoring the woman he had promised to marry just weeks ago. He was not going to step down. He was never going to defend me. 5 years of shared meals, late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and massive financial sacrifice evaporated in an instant, replaced by cold, calculated ambition. Yet as I stood there, in the center of the lavish country club, surrounded by people who viewed me as nothing more than trash to be discarded, a profound and terrifying calm washed over me. I did not scream, I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees or give them the satisfaction of a public hysterical breakdown. My heart slowed its frantic racing and my mind sharpened with absolute crystalline clarity. I looked down at my left hand. The 2-carat diamond engagement ring sparkled brightly under the overhead lights. I reached over with my right hand and slowly, deliberately slid the ring off my finger. The platinum band felt surprisingly cold as it left my skin, leaving behind a faint indent where it had rested for the past 3 years. Patricia watched me intently, her smug smile widening. She clearly assumed I was submitting to her authority, surrendering my claim to her son. I held the ring up between my thumb and forefinger, letting the brilliant cut stone catch the chandelier light one last time. Then, without breaking eye contact with Patricia, I dropped the ring straight into her crystal champagne glass. The heavy diamond sank to the bottom with a distinct muted clink, sending a sudden splash of expensive champagne over the rim. The bubbly liquid cascaded down the side of the glass, spilling directly onto the bodice of Patricia's custom emerald silk gown. Patricia gasped sharply, stumbling backward as the cold champagne stained her expensive couture dress. Her smug expression vanished instantly, replaced by shock and outrage. "Keep it, Patricia," I said, my voice smooth, pleasant, and perfectly steady. "You are going to need to pawn it to pay for his malpractice insurance." I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I turned my back on her, ignoring the security guards and the whispering crowd. I walked out of the ballroom with absolute dignity. I kept my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, my heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm against the floor. I left them standing in the wreckage of their own making, stepping out of the stifling heat of the country club and into the cool, refreshing evening air. The valet rushed to bring my car around, his eyes wide, as he clearly sensed the intense energy radiating from me. I handed him a generous cash tip, slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, and closed the door. The heavy thud of the car door sealing shut enclosed me in a sudden total silence. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles turning white with the force of my hold. The adrenaline was pumping so hard through my veins that my entire body vibrated with the impact of what had just happened. I had been completely and utterly blindsided. The man I had built my entire life around had casually discarded me for a younger woman with better hospital connections, and his family had eagerly orchestrated the entire public humiliation. Just as I reached to put the keys in the ignition, my phone buzzed loudly in the center console cup holder. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car, displaying a new text message. It was from Carter. I picked up the phone and read the words carefully, the glowing text reflecting in my eyes. "Leave the keys to my luxury condo on the kitchen counter by tomorrow morning." The message read, "My mom co-signed the lease, so you have zero rights to the property. Do not try to take the furniture, I paid for it. Brittany is moving in tomorrow." I stared at the screen, the sheer audacity of his demand washing over me in a wave of disbelief. He really believed he held all the cards. He really believed he had won. He genuinely thought Patricia was the guarantor of the lease, and that I was just a helpless tenant he could kick to the curb with a single text message. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face in the dim light of the car. I placed the phone back down in the cup holder and started the engine. Carter and his mother had no idea what they had just unleashed. I shifted the car into drive and pulled smoothly out of the country club parking lot. The warm night air rushing through the vents felt incredibly clean compared to the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. I did not shed a single tear on the 20-minute drive back to downtown. The profound sense of shock that had momentarily paralyzed me on the dance floor had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, razor-sharp focus. Carter had played his hand under the assumption that I was a naive, desperate woman who would crumble at the first sign of public rejection. He had underestimated me. When I unlocked the front door and stepped into the penthouse, the silence of the massive space greeted me. The condo was gorgeous, boasting floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline, wide plank oak floors, and a chef's kitchen outfitted with imported marble. It was a home I had secured, a sanctuary I had furnished and maintained while he buried his head in textbooks and hospital rotations. I walked straight past the living room and into the expansive master suite. I bypassed my own neatly organized clothes and went directly to Carter's side of the walk-in closet. I opened the bottom drawer of a utility cabinet and pulled out a fresh roll of heavy-duty, cheap black plastic trash bags. I unrolled the first bag, gave it a sharp flick to open it, and turned to the row of custom-tailored suits hanging precisely on velvet hangers. I had paid for every single one of those suits. I remembered sitting in the upscale boutique sipping sparkling water, while the tailor measured his shoulders, ensuring he looked like the distinguished medical professional his mother so desperately wanted him to be. The fine Italian wool, the intricate silk linings, the monogrammed cuffs. I grabbed a handful of the expensive fabric and yanked the suits off the rack. I shoved them unceremoniously into the thick black plastic. The crisp lapels crumpled and the silk ties tangled as I packed bag after bag. I did not take the time to fold anything. I tossed in his handmade leather loafers, his designer belts, and the expensive cashmere sweaters I had bought him for his last 3 birthdays. The satisfying sound of expensive items hitting the bottom of a cheap trash bag echoed through the quiet room. Within an hour, his entire wardrobe was reduced to 6 bulging, shapeless black sacks. I dragged them out of the bedroom and lined them up neatly by the front door directly in the entryway. The next morning, I woke up feeling remarkably well-rested. I took my time in the shower, letting the hot water ease the lingering tension from my shoulders. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a tailored charcoal gray blazer, matching trousers, and a crisp white silk blouse. I applied my makeup with precision, pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe style, and slipped on a pair of classic black pumps. I wanted to look exactly like the formidable businesswoman I was. I brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, poured myself a steaming mug, and leaned against the marble kitchen island. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 8 o'clock, a loud, aggressive pounding rattled the heavy wooden front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the sound of someone who believed they owned the space on the other side. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set the mug down on the counter, and walked unhurriedly toward the entryway. I stepped around the line of black trash bags and pulled the door open. Carter stood in the hallway, flanked by Brittany and Patricia. But they had not come alone. Standing just behind them, looking stern and imposing, were two uniformed city police officers. The officers had their hands resting near their utility belts, their eyes scanning the interior of the apartment as if expecting a volatile situation. Carter had clearly set the stage before arriving. He looked at me with a perfectly crafted expression of weary sadness, playing the role of the exhausted, beleaguered victim. Patricia, however, could barely contain her glee. She stood tall, clutching a beige leather purse in one hand and waving a crisp white document in the other. "Step aside, Isabella," Patricia ordered, her voice echoing loudly in the corridor. "We are not playing games with you today. We brought the authorities to ensure you vacate the premises peacefully." I did not move. I looked at the lead police officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver name tag that read, Mitchell. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem here?" Officer Mitchell stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, these people have presented documentation claiming legal right to this property. They have stated that you are refusing to leave after a verbal eviction notice. We are here to keep the peace and ensure the rightful tenants can take possession of the unit." Patricia stepped out from behind the officer, thrusting the white document forward. "I am the financial guarantor of this property," she declared, her voice ringing with arrogant authority. "I co-signed the lease for my son. This woman is nothing but a squatter. She has no legal right to be here, and I want her arrested for trespassing if she does not pack her things and leave this instant." Carter sighed heavily, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at the officers with a pained, apologetic smile. "I am so sorry you have to deal with this, officers. I tried to handle this privately, but she is completely unhinged. She refuses to accept that our living arrangement is over." Brittany stepped forward, linking her arm through Carter's. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that entirely failed to mask the malicious intent behind them. She offered a syrupy, patronizing smile. "Isabella, we really do not want to see you end up in jail," Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Carter told me about your financial struggles. I know you are probably panicking about how you will survive without his income. My father is the chief of surgery at St. Luke's, and he has a lot of influence. If you leave quietly right now, I can talk to the hospital administrators. I am sure they can find a spot for you in the cafeteria. It is honest work, and it will help you get back on your feet." The sheer condescension of the offer hung thickly in the air. Patricia smirked, clearly delighted by Brittany's performance. Carter looked down at the floor, feigning nobility. The officers shifted their weight, waiting for my inevitable breakdown. I listened to them patiently, letting the silence stretch out for a long, uncomfortable moment. I looked at Brittany, then at Carter, and finally at Patricia. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned my back on them and walked a few steps over to the kitchen island. I reached into my structured leather briefcase, which was sitting neatly next to my coffee mug. I pulled out a heavy, thick legal binder filled with notarized documents and property deeds. I walked back to the doorway and bypassed Patricia entirely, handing the weighty binder directly to Officer Mitchell. "Officer," I said calmly, "I suggest you read the second tab marked Property Ownership before you attempt to remove anyone from this residence." Officer Mitchell frowned, taking the binder. He flipped it open to the designated tab, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. The hallway grew deadly quiet. The only sound was the rustling of heavy paper as the officer flipped to the next page, verifying the official city seals and signatures. I watched as the color slowly drained from Officer Mitchell's face. His stern, authoritative posture faltered. He closed the binder slowly and looked up, his expression shifting from professional detachment to profound awkwardness. He turned slowly toward Patricia, who was still holding her single sheet of paper like a weapon. "Ma'am," Officer Mitchell said, his voice completely stripped of its previous authority. He pointed to the paper in Patricia's hand. "That document you have there. You did not co-sign a mortgage for this condo. You signed a standard month-to-month sublease agreement." Patricia frowned, her smug smile faltering. "I do not understand. What are you talking about? I am the guarantor." "You are the guarantor for a sublease, officer," Mitchell clarified, handing the heavy binder back to me with a newfound look of deep respect. "This woman is not a squatter. Her limited liability company owns this entire condominium building." The words hung in the hallway, heavy and absolute. Patricia stared at the police officer, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled fresh from the water. She snatched the heavy legal binder from Officer Mitchell's hands, her eyes frantically scanning the dense paragraphs, the official state stamps, and the undeniable signature at the bottom of the deed. The arrogant sneer that had defined her face for the past 5 years melted away, replaced by a pale, sickly shade of panic. Carter stepped forward, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked at his mother, expecting her to unleash her usual fury, to demand the manager to threaten a lawsuit. Instead, Patricia simply let the binder drop to her side, her impeccably manicured fingers trembling. Brittany, still clinging to Carter's arm, let out a confused little scoff, clearly unable to comprehend a world where her new family did not hold all the power. Officer Mitchell adjusted his utility belt and squared his shoulders, entirely done with their charade. He looked directly at Carter and pointed a stern finger toward the elevator bank at the end of the hall. "You heard the facts," the officer stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You have no legal standing here. This property belongs to this woman. I am ordering you to vacate these premises immediately. If you refuse to leave, or if you cause any further disturbance, I will arrest all 3 of you for criminal trespassing. Do I make myself clear?" Carter blinked, his perfect camera ready, features twisting into an ugly mask of disbelief. He looked from the armed police officers to his mother, and then finally to me. The realization that he had been completely outmaneuvered began to fracture his polished exterior. This was a man who had spent his entire life being handed everything on a silver platter, shielded from the consequences of his actions by his mother's checkbook and his own manufactured charm. Now standing in the corridor of a building I owned with the woman he had intended to impress, watching his profound failure, the reality of his situation crash down on him. I did not give him the chance to regroup. I stepped forward, the toes of my classic black pumps meeting the nearest plastic trash bag. With a swift, forceful kick, I sent the first bag sliding across the polished hardwood of the entryway and out into the hallway. It hit Carter directly in the shins with a dull thud. He stumbled backward, releasing Brittany's arm as he nearly lost his footing. I kicked the second bag, then the third. One by one, the cheap black plastic sacks full of his custom-tailored suits, his expensive Italian leather shoes, and his cashmere sweaters tumbled out of my beautiful home and landed in a pathetic, messy heap at his feet. One of the bags caught on the doorframe and tore open, spilling a dozen expensive silk ties across the hallway carpet. Brittany let out a high-pitched shriek, leaping backward to avoid a stray velvet hanger that slid across the floor. She looked at the trash bags, then at Carter, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and profound embarrassment. Carter's face turned a violent mottled shade of crimson. The polite, charming doctor facade he had maintained so carefully at the graduation gala completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the entitled, fragile boy he truly was. He kicked one of the torn trash bags away from him, his chest heaving as he glared at me with absolute, unadulterated hatred. He had wanted to humiliate me. He had wanted to kick me out of my own home and move his new prize in by the afternoon. Instead, he was standing in a pile of garbage bags under the watchful eyes of 2 armed police officers, looking like an absolute fool. I stood in the doorway, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly at my sides. I offered him a small, cold smile. "I believe your belongings are ready for transport," I told him, my voice completely stripped of any emotion. I suggest you gather them quickly. The officers have better things to do than watch you pack your trash. Patricia stepped forward, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. You cannot do this to us. Do you know who we are? We are a respected family. You are nothing but a recruiter. Carter grabbed his mother's arm, pulling her back. He was shaking with rage, his hands curled into tight, white-knuckled fists at his sides. He took a step toward me, but Officer Mitchell immediately moved to intercept him, placing a firm hand on his nightstick. Carter stopped, but the sheer malice radiating from him was palpable. You think you have won? He spat, his voice trembling with a dark, venomous fury. You think owning a building makes you untouchable. You are nothing, Isabella. You run a boutique agency that survives on vendor contracts. Do you even know who you are messing with? He reached out and grabbed Brittany by the hand, yanking her forward slightly. Brittany's father is Dr. Harrison Thorne. He is the chief of surgery at St. Luke's Medical Center. He sits on the regional board of directors. St. Luke's is the exact hospital network your pathetic little recruiting agency relies on for 90% of your placements. You need them to survive. We do not need you. Carter was breathing heavily now, spittle flying from his lips as he unleashed his ultimate threat. I am going to make a single phone call to Dr. Thorne today. I am going to tell him exactly how unstable and vindictive you are. By the end of the week, I will have you completely blacklisted from the entire medical industry in this state. Your agency will be bankrupt, your contracts will be shredded, and you will be begging for a job in a hospital cafeteria. You are ruined, Isabella. I will make sure you lose absolutely everything. I listened to his unhinged tirade without blinking. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not show fear. He was banking on the power of a man he had not even married into, yet relying on another family's influence to fight his battles. It was the ultimate display of his inherent weakness. I let him savor the illusion of control for just a little while longer. I did not raise my voice to argue. I simply looked at him, taking in the pathetic sight of a man standing in a hallway, surrounded by garbage bags filled with clothes I had purchased for him. Have a wonderful afternoon, Carter, I said softly. I took a step back into my home and firmly closed the heavy wooden door, the solid click of the deadbolt echoing loudly in the entryway. I engaged the secondary chain lock and leaned against the cool wood for just a fraction of a second, listening as Officer Mitchell sternly ordered them toward the elevators. The immediate threat was gone, but the war was far from over. I walked away from the front door and moved straight into the living room, my heels completely silent on the thick area rug. I sat down at my glass writing desk and immediately flipped open my sleek silver laptop. I accessed the joint bank account that I shared with Carter. He had already initiated a massive wire transfer to pay for a new penthouse with Brittany. The cursor blinked rhythmically next to the pending transaction status. The amount staring back at me was staggering, representing the entirety of the liquid savings I had accumulated over the past 3 years. He had not just tried to take a modest deposit for a new place. He had attempted to drain the entire account to secure a luxury penthouse under his and Brittany's names. The sheer entitlement of the act sharpened my focus. I did not panic. I simply clicked on the transaction details. Because I had opened this account years ago to manage our shared household expenses, my name was listed as the primary account holder. Carter was merely an authorized user. It was a detail he had clearly forgotten in his rush to secure his new life with my money. I navigated to the settings and canceled the pending wire transfer. The status updated immediately from pending to voided. I did not stop there. I went directly into the account controls and initiated a hard freeze on the entire joint account, blocking all outgoing transfers, debit card transactions, and ATM withdrawals. A red banner appeared confirming the account was locked. A deep, satisfying calm settled over me. I closed the laptop and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. My phone, resting on the kitchen island, began to vibrate against the marble surface. It did not stop. The screen illuminated with incoming calls from Carter and Patricia. I ignored them all, letting them go straight to voicemail. When the ringing finally paused, the voicemail notifications began to stack up. I tapped the screen and listened to the unraveling of Carter's carefully constructed world. Isabella. My card is declining. I am sitting in the leasing office and the wire transfer bounced. Unfreeze the account right now. You are embarrassing me. The second message lost all pretense of politeness. His voice was elevated, echoing slightly. Isabella, pick up the phone. The broker just ran my credit, and it is tanking because the collateral deposit failed. Brittany is crying in the lobby. You have no right to withhold my money. By the fourth message, Carter was completely unhinged. He threatened to destroy my career and vowed to make me pay for humiliating him in front of Dr. Thorne's daughter. I listened to every single word with a detached clinical interest. He had built his entire arrogant persona on a foundation of my financial support. Without my money, he was nothing but a broke medical resident with a mountain of debt. I deleted the voicemails, blocked his number, and placed my phone down. The silence in my condo was peaceful, but it did not last. By late afternoon, the nature of the notifications on my phone changed. Instead of calls from Carter, a steady stream of text messages began flooding in from mutual friends, college acquaintances, and even distant relatives I had not spoken to in years. I picked up the phone, confused by the sudden influx of messages. I opened a text from a woman I had considered a close friend. The message read, "I cannot believe you would do something so psycho. Carter is a good guy. You need to get help." Another message from a former colleague was even harsher, calling me a bitter gold-digging ex who could not handle being dumped. I frowned, feeling a prickle of unease. I opened my social media applications and saw the source. Patricia and Carter had launched a highly coordinated, vicious smear campaign. Patricia had posted a video to her main page. I clicked play. It was a deceptively edited clip of the confrontation in my hallway earlier that morning. The video started right at the moment I kicked the trash bags out the door. The sound had been entirely muted and dubbed over with sad, dramatic instrumental music. It completely omitted Officer Mitchell ordering them to leave the premises. It deliberately omitted Patricia's arrogant demands and Brittany's highly condescending offer of a cafeteria job. It only showed me kicking Carter's belongings into the hallway while he stood there looking defeated. Below the video, Patricia had written a tearful paragraph. She detailed how her brilliant son had finally broken free from an abusive woman. She claimed I had drained his bank accounts out of spite and was holding his belongings hostage. She painted me as a bitter ex-fiancé who was desperately trying to ruin his bright future. The comment section was a cesspool of hatred. People I had hosted in my home were openly calling me toxic. Carter had shared the post to his own network, adding a brief, humble comment thanking his friends for their support during this traumatic transition. He was playing the victim, perfectly weaponizing his social circles to destroy my credibility. My phone buzzed again with another hateful text message. The easy thing to do would have been to post my own statement and expose their lies. But engaging in a public screaming match would only validate their narrative. I closed the applications, turned off my phone notifications, and walked away. I was going to give them absolute silence. The weekend passed with me entirely ignoring the digital storm raging outside my doors. On Monday morning, I dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit and headed to my corporate office downtown. When I stepped out of the private elevator at my recruiting agency, the familiar hum of ringing phones grounded me. This was my empire. This was the world I had built with my own 2 hands. I walked past the reception desk, offering a warm smile to Sarah. I settled into my corner office and immersed myself in a stack of vendor contracts. I was focused, productive, and completely in my element. That peace was shattered just before noon when a loud commotion erupted in the reception area. I could hear Sarah's voice rising in distress, repeatedly asking someone to wait in the lobby. Before I could stand up to investigate, my heavy glass door was shoved open with violent force. It slammed against the wall stopper, the loud crack echoing through the suite. Patricia stormed into my office, her face red with exertion and fury. She had bypassed building security, entirely marching past my stunned employees. She marched right up to my mahogany desk, slamming both her hands flat against the polished wood. "You are going to unfreeze that money right this second," Patricia demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "You are destroying my son's life over a petty grievance. You are going to give him his money back for the sake of family loyalty, or I will make sure everyone in this building knows exactly what kind of monster you are." I remained seated, resting my hands neatly on top of my open files. I looked up at the older woman who had spent years trying to make me feel small. She looked completely out of place in my world, standing in the heart of the business she had repeatedly called low class. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not offer her the reaction she so desperately craved. She was completely out of her depth. Her aggressive posture faltered as the seconds ticked by. She had expected me to cower in fear. I did not. I simply looked at her, allowing a heavy, deafening silence to fill the spacious room. To me, right now in this moment, she was absolutely nothing but a minor inconvenience in my otherwise perfect day. I let the silence stretch, watching Patricia's chest heave with indignation. She was waiting for me to engage, waiting for the hysterical screaming match she was so accustomed to instigating. When I offered nothing but a blank, impassive stare, her tactic shifted. The fiery rage in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a sudden, calculated vulnerability that was entirely manufactured. She leaned closer across my mahogany desk. "Isabella, please," Patricia pleaded, placing one of her manicured hands over her chest. "We treated you like a daughter for 5 years. I know you are hurt, and I know Carter handled the situation at the gala poorly, but this is family we are talking about. You cannot just freeze his assets and kick him out on the street. He is a doctor with a demanding schedule. He needs that money to secure a home. You are letting your emotions ruin his life. Unfreeze the account for the sake of family loyalty. We can figure the rest out later." The sheer audacity of her words was almost impressive to witness. She was standing directly in the middle of the corporate office I had painstakingly built from the ground up, demanding I hand over my hard-earned money to fund her son's new life, with another woman wrapping the demand in the guise of family loyalty. It was the exact same emotional manipulation she had used for years to coerce me into paying for Carter's textbooks, his rent, and his expensive vacations. But the illusion was broken. I did not utter a single word in response. I simply reached under the thick edge of my desk and pressed my finger against the silent panic button mounted near the leg. I kept my eyes locked on Patricia, maintaining an expression of absolute calm. Patricia waited for a response. When none came, the manufactured vulnerability vanished, instantly replaced by the vicious anger she had displayed at the country club. "You arrogant little brat," she snarled, slamming her hand down on the desk. "You think you can just ignore me? You are going to pick up that phone and call the bank right now, or I swear I will tear this entire office apart." The heavy glass door to my suite swung open behind her. Two towering building security guards stepped into the office. The lead guard, a stern man named Marcus, quickly assessed the situation. He did not hesitate. Marcus and his partner flanked Patricia, each taking a firm hold of her upper arms. "Ma'am, you need to come with us right now," Marcus stated, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "You are trespassing on private property, and you are going to be escorted out of the building immediately." Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in absolute shock as the large men physically pulled her away from my desk. "Let go of me," she shrieked, kicking her heels against the plush carpet. "Do you know who I am? Take your hands off me this instant. I will have you both fired. I am speaking to her." The guards ignored her frantic threats. They turned her around and marched her toward the door. Patricia dug her heels into the floor, struggling against their grip, but she was no match for their sheer physical strength. She twisted her neck to look back at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You will pay for this, Isabella," she screamed, her voice echoing down the hallway as they dragged her out of my suite. "You will pay for what you have done to my family." The heavy glass door swung shut, cutting off the shrill sound of her threats. The office returned to a state of profound silence. I looked at the spot where she had just been standing, took a deliberate breath, and smoothed my hands over my blazer. Sarah, my usually unflappable receptionist, peeked her head tentatively into the office a moment later. She looked thoroughly shaken by the violent intrusion. "I am so sorry, Isabella," Sarah stammered, her hands trembling slightly. She just pushed right past the front desk before I could even stop her. I should have called security sooner. I offered Sarah a warm, reassuring smile. It is entirely fine, Sarah. You handled it perfectly. Please contact building management and ensure her face is added to the permanent restricted entry list. She is not to be allowed past the lobby ever again. Sarah nodded quickly, looking relieved that I was not angry with her. I will take care of it immediately. As Sarah returned to her desk, I turned my attention back to the stack of vendor contracts. I picked up my silver pen and immediately resumed my work without hesitation. I felt an incredible sense of clarity. Carter and Patricia were desperate, and their desperation was making them sloppy. They had relied on my compliance for so long that they literally did not know how to function without it. I spent the next few hours immersed in my business, analyzing placement metrics and coordinating schedules for the upcoming quarter. The steady rhythm of my work was a comforting reminder of everything I had achieved entirely on my own. But the sense of victory was destined to be short-lived. Carter had not been making empty threats when he stood in my hallway surrounded by garbage bags. His retaliation materialized much faster than I could have ever anticipated. At precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah knocked softly on my open door. She was holding a thick, rigid cardboard envelope with a bright red expedited shipping label. "A courier just dropped this off," Sarah said, handing the package across the desk. "He said it requires your direct signature." I took the envelope, noting the heavy weight of the premium cardboard. I reached for my silver letter opener, sliced through the top seal, and pulled out a stack of crisp, watermarked documents. The header at the top of the first page was printed in bold, embossed navy blue ink. It was the official corporate seal of St. Luke's Medical Center. My stomach gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. St. Luke's was my agency's largest client. For the past 3 years, my firm had held the exclusive contract to recruit and place highly specialized nursing staff and administrative personnel across their entire network of hospitals and outpatient clinics. That single account represented millions of dollars in annual revenue. It was the cornerstone of my business, the foundation upon which I had built my entire company. I smoothed the pages flat against my desk and began to read the dense legal text. The letter was formally addressed to me, but it was not a standard communication from the Human Resources Department. It came directly from the executive board. I read the opening paragraph, my eyes scanning the harsh, unforgiving language. The letter stated that St. Luke's Medical Center was initiating an immediate unilateral termination of all active vendor contracts with my recruiting agency. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I read the cited reasoning. The heavy document explicitly alleged that a recent comprehensive internal review had uncovered severe ethical concerns regarding my agency's leadership and a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. The language was vague enough to avoid immediate legal liability, but sharp enough to completely sever our business relationship without notice. The aggressive termination clause directly invoked a strict morality provision embedded in our original contract, claiming that maintaining a partnership with my agency posed a significant risk to the hospital's reputation. They were completely dissolving our partnership, effectively severing millions of dollars in future revenue with a single stroke of a pen. I flipped to the final page of the document. There, sitting above the printed title of Chief of Surgery and Executive Board Member, was the unmistakable, sweeping signature of Dr. Harrison Thorne. Brittany's father. Carter had actually done it. He had gone straight to his new fiancé's wealthy, influential father, and he had convinced the man to use his immense corporate power to destroy my livelihood. Dr. Thorne had bypassed the hospital's standard procurement protocols, leveraged his position on the board, and orchestrated a massive, devastating strike against my company, simply to avenge the bruised ego of his daughter's new boyfriend. The sheer corruption of the act was staggering. A major metropolitan hospital network had just terminated a highly lucrative, perfectly functioning vendor contract based entirely on a personal vendetta. They were perfectly willing to disrupt their own vital staffing pipelines and completely compromise their internal administrative operations just to ruin a woman who had dared to stand up to Carter. I sat back in my leather chair, the pages of the termination letter feeling incredibly heavy in my hands. The financial impact on my agency would be catastrophic. Without the massive St. Luke's contract, I would have to desperately scramble to cover my expensive overhead, reassure my remaining nervous clients, and potentially lay off my loyal staff. Carter knew exactly where to strike to inflict the maximum amount of damage. He could not touch my personal property, so he had gone straight for my professional throat. As I stared at Dr. Thorne's signature, trying to calculate my next strategic move, my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a new text message. I had blocked Carter's primary phone number, but this message came from an unknown contact. I picked up the device and tapped the screen to open the notification. It was a picture message. The image loaded, revealing a high-definition selfie of Carter. He was standing in a brightly lit hospital corridor, wearing a pristine, perfectly pressed white doctor's coat. The embroidered logo of St. Luke's Medical Center was clearly visible on his breast pocket. He had a smug, victorious smile plastered across his face, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text accompanied the image. "Told you I'd ruin you. Have fun at the bankruptcy office." I stared at the glowing screen of my cell phone. The arrogant, deeply satisfying smile on Carter's face practically daring me to completely break down. He played his trump card, believing that severing my primary source of revenue would leave me destitute. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had lived with. I did not throw my phone across the large room. I did not dissolve into tears over the sudden loss of my agency's cornerstone client. Instead, I locked my screen, set the device face down on my desk, and took a deliberate breath. The analytical part of my brain, the part that had built this firm from a folding table into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, immediately took control. Carter wanted a war of attrition. I preferred a silent, surgical approach. I reached for my desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for my corporate attorney. Veronica did not do small talk. She was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless, aggressive litigation firms in the entire city. Her office was located 3 blocks down the street, and she had instructed me to come over immediately. I grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, walked past my concerned reception staff with a reassuring smile, and marched out into the afternoon air. My cell phone continued to vibrate in my pocket. I ignored every single notification. Social media noise was merely a distraction for amateurs. I was focused purely on the paperwork. When I finally stepped into Veronica's corner office, she was already sitting at her massive glass conference table. I handed her the termination letter from St. Luke's Medical Center. Veronica adjusted her reading glasses and scanned the document. She noted Dr. Thorne's signature at the bottom and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "This is incredibly sloppy," Veronica stated, tossing the paper back onto the table. "Terminating a massive multi-million-dollar vendor contract, effectively overnight, citing vague ethical concerns, is a massive liability. They bypass their own procurement department to enact a personal vendetta. We could tie them up in litigation for years over this breach of contract alone." "We are not going to sue St. Luke's," I replied smoothly. "That is exactly the kind of drawn-out public legal battle Carter and his new family want. They want to drain my resources and drag my name through the mud. I have a much faster, far more destructive method of handling Carter." Veronica smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that made her a terrifying opponent in a courtroom. She reached for the thickest manila folder on the table. "Excellent," she said. "Because I took the liberty of pulling the original financial agreements you had me draft 5 years ago. Let us review the tuition contract." Carter had always foolishly believed that I was just a blindly devoted, generous girlfriend who was desperately throwing my hard-earned money at him to secure a future engagement. He had no idea that I treated every major financial expenditure as a calculated investment. And I never made an investment without securing a legally binding insurance policy. Veronica slid a crisp, notarized document across the glass table. It was the original tuition assistance agreement I had required Carter to sign before I transferred the first $50,000 to his financial aid office. "You were remarkably thorough," Isabella Veronica noted, tapping her manicured fingernail against the second page of the document. This is a highly structured, legally binding personal loan. The terms explicitly state that you agreed to fund his medical school tuition and living expenses with the strict expectation of repayment. I slowly looked down at the document, tracing the line of Carter's hasty signature with my eyes. He had been so eager to get his hands on the money that he had signed his own financial death warrant. Let us look at Clause 4, subsection B. Veronica continued, her voice purring with professional satisfaction. The morality and dissolution clause. You stipulated that this loan would remain deferred, without interest, only as long as the relationship remained intact, and both parties upheld a standard of mutual fidelity and respect. However, in the event of a separation initiated by infidelity, public disparagement, or a breach of good faith, the entire principal balance becomes immediately due in full. He breached the contract the moment he stood on that stage at the country club and announced his engagement to Brittany. I stated, my voice cold and steady. And he certainly breached it when he and his mother launched a coordinated defamatory attack on my character this morning. Exactly, Veronica agreed. He triggered the acceleration clause himself. We are talking about every subsequent tuition payment, the thousands of dollars in rent. You covered the living expenses, the wardrobing, and the medical equipment. We have the complete paper trail, including the itemized receipts and bank transfer records for the entire 5-year period. The total principal due is staggering. I want to initiate aggressive debt collection procedures immediately, I told her, holding her sharp gaze. I do not want a polite warning letter. I want the maximum legal pressure applied. I want liens placed on any assets he tries to acquire. I want his wages garnished the second he begins his residency at St. Luke's. I want this debt to follow him like a shadow, completely ruining his debt-to-income ratio, so he cannot secure a basic credit card without my explicit permission. Veronica's smile widened. I will have the formal demand letter drafted and served to him by a process server before the end of the business day. That provides us with immediate grounds to seek a court order to freeze any personal accounts he holds independently. We will absolutely bury him in paperwork. Carter had wanted to play a game of financial ruin. He failed to realize that by forcing my hand, he had activated a legally binding trap that would completely decimate his own financial future. He was about to enter his prestigious medical residency with a mountain of aggressively pursued debt, a ruined credit score, and a legal battle he could not possibly afford to fight. Veronica began rapidly making notes on her legal pad, outlining the exact sequence of filings we would execute the following morning. Within exactly 30 minutes, we had constructed a watertight plan to legally dismantle Carter's financial independence. As we wrapped up the meeting, Veronica closed the thick manila folder and folded her hands neatly on top of the glass table. She looked at me, her sharp eyes studying my calm demeanor with a hint of genuine curiosity. We have Carter handled, Veronica stated quietly. But we need to address the reality of your business situation, Isabella. Losing the St. Luke's Medical Center contract is a massive blow to your agency. How exactly do you plan to survive this loss without completely downsizing your firm? I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy trousers. I wasn't worried. I did not feel the crushing anxiety that Carter had so desperately wanted to inflict upon me. I simply offered Veronica a calm, knowing smile. I walked back to my office suite, the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the corporate carpet. When I stepped inside my private office, I closed the door and locked it. I walked past my desk and approached the built-in mahogany bookshelf lining the far wall. I reached behind a row of heavy leather-bound reference books and pressed a concealed button. A small rectangular section of the paneling popped open, revealing a hidden wall safe. I quickly punched in the numeric code. The heavy metal door clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out a massive, thick stack of highly classified, completely confidential acquisition documents. I placed the heavy stack onto my desk, the bold lettering on the cover page catching the light. Carter had thought he was destroying my business by cutting off my largest client. He had absolutely no idea that I had actively been planning to sell the entire agency to a massive global staffing conglomerate for the past 6 months. I did not answer Carter's message. I did not give him the satisfaction of knowing whether his photograph had wounded me, frightened me, or shaken my confidence. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the polished surface of my desk and looked at the acquisition documents spread before me like a set of loaded weapons. For the first time that afternoon, the full shape of the situation became clear. Carter had aimed at the one business he believed defined me. He had gone after the agency because that was the only version of my life he understood. To him, I was still the woman working impossible hours, reviewing staffing contracts late into the night, sacrificing weekends so he could study for exams and pretend he was destined for greatness. He knew the public company. He knew the recruiting firm. He knew the office, the employees, the St. Luke's account, and the vendor contracts. He did not know the empire underneath it. I gathered the St. Luke's termination letter, the acquisition documents, and the financial summaries into 3 precise stacks. Then I called Veronica again. This time I did not ask to come to her office. I gave her one instruction: come to mine. She arrived 20 minutes later, stepping out of the private elevator with the expression of a woman who already understood that something much larger than a breach of contract was unfolding. Sarah tried to announce her, but Veronica was already moving down the corridor with a black leather case in one hand and her phone in the other. She entered my office, closed the door behind her, and locked it without asking permission. Her eyes moved immediately to the documents on my desk. "You left our meeting before answering the most important question," she said, taking the chair across from me. "You said you were not worried about losing St. Luke's. Now I understand why." I slid the first stack toward her. The agency was never the whole structure. It was the front-facing asset. Veronica opened the folder. Her face remained composed, but her silence changed. It sharpened. The more pages she turned, the more her eyes narrowed with professional fascination. She was not reading a desperate backup plan. She was reading a corporate battlefield that had been prepared months before Carter ever imagined betraying me publicly. "Vanguard Medical Tech," she said quietly. I nodded. The name alone carried weight. In the healthcare industry, Vanguard was not a friendly brand. It did not advertise itself with inspirational commercials or glossy patient stories. It moved quietly through failing institutions, distressed debt portfolios, medical supply chains, and hospital networks that had overextended themselves. Vanguard appeared when executives had already made too many arrogant decisions and needed someone with enough capital to keep the walls from collapsing. To the public, Vanguard Medical Tech was a faceless holding company with an appetite for distressed healthcare assets. To Carter, if he had ever heard the name at all, it would have sounded like something far above his world, something discussed by board members, banks, and corporate attorneys. He had no idea it belonged to me. 3 years ago, I told Veronica I started diverting the profits from the agency into private acquisitions. Small clinics first, then medical equipment contracts, then supply chain debt. I kept my name off the visible leadership structure and used proxy directors to avoid attention. Veronica turned another page, and this time she actually smiled. "This is not just diversification," she said. "This is control." It became control when St. Luke's started bleeding money. I opened the second folder and placed the St. Luke's debt map in front of her. The hospital's public image was spotless, but the internal numbers told a very different story. Reckless expansion, vanity construction projects, executive bonuses that made no operational sense, overpaid administrators, underfunded departments, emergency loans disguised as strategic refinancing. St. Luke's looked powerful from the outside, but financially it was rotting behind marble walls. 3 weeks ago, Vanguard acquired their distressed debt package, I said. Not all of it, the important parts. Veronica looked down at the highlighted sections. Residency program funding, administrative payroll, vendor stabilization accounts, and executive restructuring triggers, I added. She lifted her eyes to mine. Now she fully understood. Dr. Harrison Thorne had not merely signed a retaliatory termination letter. He had created a documented act of executive misconduct inside an institution already under the financial control of my holding company. He had taken a hospital resource and used it to settle a personal family score. In doing so, He had given Vanguard exactly the justification it needed to open a full governance audit. Carter thought he had convinced Brittany's father to destroy me. In reality, he had convinced Brittany's father to hand me the legal key to the boardroom. Veronica leaned back slowly. So, the St. Luke's termination letter is not a wound. No, I said. It is evidence. And Carter's selfie. An admission of motive. I turned the phone over and showed her the message again. Told you I'd ruin you. Have fun at the bankruptcy office. Veronica gave a soft, humorless laugh. He actually sent this after the termination letter. He was proud of himself. That helps us twice, she said. First, it supports the personal vendetta angle. Second, it ties the hospital's board action directly to him. If Thorne claims this was an independent ethics review, Carter's message makes that argument look ridiculous. I opened the third folder. This one contained the finalized acquisition timeline, the bailout deposits, and the corporate authority documents proving my controlling position in Vanguard. Veronica read carefully, page by page. When she reached the final section, her expression turned almost reverent. Isabella, she said, if you walk into that hospital with this file, Thorne cannot remove you. Sterling cannot ignore you. Their entire executive board will have to treat you as the controlling creditor. That is exactly why I am not filing a lawsuit first. You are going to let them invite you in. I smiled faintly. They already believe I am desperate. Desperate people beg. Desperate people defend themselves. Desperate people ask powerful men for mercy. I want Dr. Thorne to feel completely safe when he calls me into that boardroom. Veronica closed the folder and tapped one finger against the cover. And when he does, then I will let him perform his little execution, I said. I will let Carter sit there and watch. I will let the board hear every accusation. Then I will show them who owns the debt keeping their hospital alive. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside my office windows, the city moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars slid through traffic. Office lights flickered on across neighboring towers. Somewhere inside St. Luke's, Carter was probably still walking the halls in his white coat, basking in his imagined victory, believing he had finally traded me for a better life. He did not understand that every corridor he walked through now belonged to the company I controlled. Veronica placed the documents back into neat alignment. Then we prepared 2 strikes, she said. 1 personal, 1 corporate. Carter first, I replied. Serve the loan default. Freeze what we can. Put immediate pressure on every account tied to him. And Thorne. He gets tomorrow. Veronica stood already typing instructions to her legal team. Then we make sure every document is certified, every timeline is clean, and every signature is impossible to dispute. I watched her move toward the door, but before she left, she turned back. You realize what this means, she said. Once you reveal Vanguard, there is no going back to being underestimated. I looked down at Carter's message one last time before deleting the image from the screen. I am done being underestimated. Veronica closed the heavy mahogany door behind her, ensuring the lock clicked into place. Her sharp eyes darted from my calm expression to the thick, confidential files resting on my desk. You walked out before explaining yourself, Veronica noted, taking a seat. You are planning to sell the agency, the business you have spent 5 years turning into an absolute powerhouse. I rested my hands flat on the desk. Selling the agency is merely a surface-level maneuver. I explained, my voice steady. It is a tactical liquidation of a minor asset. I am cashing out to a global staffing conglomerate, but that is simply the distraction. I slid the stack of highly classified documents across the desk. The agency was my public face. I continued watching her read the bold lettering on the cover page. It was the business everyone, including Carter, knew about. But behind the scenes, I have been operating on a completely different level. Veronica opened the first folder, her eyes rapidly scanning the complex financial structures outlined on the pages. As she read, her eyebrows slowly rose in genuine astonishment. She looked up at me, a silent question forming on her lips. Over the last 3 years, I explained, pacing my words to let the magnitude of the revelation sink in. I have taken the massive multi-million-dollar profits generated by my recruiting agency and quietly funneled them into a private secondary venture. I am the silent, absolute majority shareholder of Vanguard Medical Tech. Vanguard Medical Tech was a massive corporate holding company that specialized in acquiring and restructuring distressed healthcare assets across the country. We purchased failing clinics, bought out struggling medical supply chains, and acquired the debt of major hospital networks that had been mismanaged by arrogant administrators. Because I maintained an ironclad silent partnership, utilizing offshore proxies to mask the ownership structure, my name did not appear anywhere on the public leadership board. To the rest of the business world, Vanguard Medical Tech was a faceless, incredibly wealthy corporate entity with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. To me, it was the ultimate hidden arsenal of financial fortress I had constructed piece by piece while building my public agency. Carter had spent the last 5 years looking down on me, viewing me as a convenient ATM to fund his lifestyle. He believed that a doctor held a higher status than a businesswoman. He had no idea that I had spent those same 5 years quietly buying up the industry he was trying to enter. Veronica turned the page, her eyes widening as she read the specific details of the latest acquisition. "Isabella," she breathed, her voice dropping to a stunned whisper. "These are the debt acquisition papers for St. Luke's Medical Center." "Exactly," I replied, leaning back in my chair and allowing a deep, profoundly satisfying smile to spread across my face. St. Luke's has a gleaming public reputation built on decades of charitable contributions and media campaigns, but internally, they have been bleeding out for the past 18 months. They expanded too quickly, mismanaged their budget on vanity projects, and handed over control to arrogant, short-sighted board members like Dr. Harrison Thorne. They were drowning in toxic debt, desperately trying to keep their sinking ship afloat, before their shareholders and the general public realized the brutal, unavoidable truth about their finances. I tapped my pen against the desk. 3 weeks ago, Vanguard Medical Tech swooped in as their corporate savior. We executed an aggressive buyout of their failing debt, injecting the capital they needed to avoid bankruptcy. But we did not just buy their general operational liabilities. I specifically instructed my proxy board to purchase the exact financial network that manages their residency programs and their entire payroll system. Every financial artery that keeps that hospital functioning now flows directly through Vanguard accounts. Veronica slowly shook her head, an expression of profound professional respect settling over her sharp features. "This is brilliant. You hold the primary debt for their entire residency network. You control the payroll. You control the funding for the exact program Carter is entering. I practically own the hospital," I confirmed, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "As the majority debt holder, Vanguard has the legal authority to force a complete administrative restructuring if the hospital's executive board demonstrates gross financial negligence or ethical misconduct. They basically handed me the keys to their kingdom the moment they signed those acquisition papers." Veronica's eyes gleamed as she caught the legal implication. "Dr. Thorne just handed you the exact ammunition you need. By canceling your contract out of spite, he has jeopardized the hospital's operational stability. You now have the explicit legal right to step and demand a full audit and systematically dismantle his position. Dr. Thorne believes he is an untouchable executive." I stated, my tone dangerously cold. "He thinks he can casually destroy a woman's business to make his daughter's new fiancé feel like a big man. He has absolutely no idea that he just declared war on the majority shareholder of the holding company that currently owns his hospital's debt. He answers to Vanguard Medical Tech, and Vanguard Medical Tech is me." The sheer irony of the situation was intoxicating. Carter had run crying to Dr. Thorne, begging him to use his influence to destroy my livelihood. He had taken that smug selfie in the brightly lit hallway of St. Luke's, believing he was entirely safe. He had sought refuge in a fortress that I secretly owned. Every hour he spent working in that hospital, every paycheck he received, and every evaluation that determined his career would ultimately be overseen by a corporate entity that I completely controlled. He had essentially traded being dependent on my personal bank account to being entirely dependent on my corporate holding company. When Veronica filed the collection paperwork on his tuition loans, it would be a devastating blow to his immediate finances. But when I finally revealed that I held the ultimate power over his prestigious new career, over the very hospital where he thought he had secured his future, the destruction would be absolute. He had merely locked himself inside a trap of his own making. The silence in the office was heavy with anticipation as Veronica and I finalized the timeline for our dual assault. We would launch the personal debt collection tomorrow morning, letting Carter feel the immediate panic of frozen accounts. Then I would prepare the vanguard corporate action. Suddenly, the sharp, distinctive chime of an incoming high-priority email broke the quiet atmosphere in the room. The sound emanated from my cell phone still resting face down on the polished wood of my desk. I reached over, flipped the device, and tapped the screen to open the notification. It was not a message from my agency staff or a regular corporate client. It was an official, highly formal communication sent directly from the executive administrative offices of St. Luke's Medical Center. I opened the email, my eyes scanning the text. It was a formal summons drafted and authorized by Dr. Harrison Thorne. The message was dripping with arrogant condescension, using the exact corporate jargon designed to intimidate smaller vendors. He was officially demanding my mandatory presence at an emergency hospital board meeting scheduled for 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. The stated purpose of the summons was to formally finalize my agency's termination and enact my permanent blacklisting from their entire medical network, effectively banning me from working with any of their affiliates. He wanted to parade me in front of his peers. He wanted to force me to sit in their pristine boardroom and watch as he stripped away my business, displaying his power and cementing his daughter's victory. He wanted a public execution. I stared at the glowing screen, a slow, dangerous smile touching the corners of my mouth. He had absolutely no idea who he had just invited into his boardroom. The following afternoon, I stepped through the heavy glass doors of the executive suite at St. Luke's Medical Center. The space was deliberately designed to intimidate, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows and a long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The entire regional medical board was already seated, their expressions a mixture of cold authority and morbid curiosity. At the head of the long table sat Dr. Harrison Thorne, his hands neatly folded over a stack of documents, and sitting smugly in a leather visitor chair in the corner of the room wearing his pristine white resident coat was Carter. He had secured a front-row seat to watch my public execution. I did not hesitate. I walked directly toward the single empty chair positioned at the opposite end of the long table. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing in the deafening silence of the massive room. I carried my heavy leather briefcase in one hand and my phone in the other. I placed the briefcase onto the polished wood, pulled out my chair, and sat down. I smoothed my tailored blazer and looked directly down the length of the table, meeting Dr. Thorne's arrogant gaze without a single trace of fear. "Miss Isabella." Dr. Thorne began, his voice projecting across the room with theatrical gravity. "You have been summoned here today because this board has reached a unanimous decision regarding the future of your agency's contract with our hospital network. It has come to our attention that your recent personal conduct falls entirely outside the ethical standards we require of our corporate partners. The allegations of vindictive behavior and financial hostility directed toward one of our own promising young residents are deeply concerning. St. Luke's Medical Center cannot and will not conduct business with an individual who acts with such malice. We are here to formally finalize the termination of your vendor contract and permanently blacklist your agency from our system." Carter shifted in his corner seat, a wide, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He leaned back and crossed his arms, absolutely reveling in his perceived victory. Several board members nodded in agreement with Dr. Thorne, looking at me with undisguised contempt. They expected me to argue, to beg for my livelihood, or to break down in tears. They had orchestrated this entire ambush specifically to humiliate me. I allowed a beat of silence to pass, letting the hostility in the room settle. Then I unlatched the heavy brass clasps of my briefcase. I did not pull out a defense. I did not pull out a desperate plea for reconsideration. I pulled out 3 perfectly organized, thick manila folders and placed them deliberately on the table. "Before we finalize any terminations, Dr. Thorne," I stated, my voice calm, projecting clearly across the large boardroom. I believe it is imperative that we address a significant change in the hospital's corporate ownership structure. I am not here simply as a vendor defending a staffing contract. I am here as a representative of Vanguard Medical Tech. The name hung in the air. Dr. Thorne's confident posture faltered slightly. Several board members exchanged confused, uneasy glances. They all knew the name. Vanguard Medical Tech was the massive, faceless holding company that had recently swooped in to purchase the hospital's failing debt, saving them from a highly publicized bankruptcy. As the authorized representative of Vanguard Medical Tech, I continued, my eyes locking onto Dr. Thorne. I am formally notifying this executive board that your recent actions constitute a gross misuse of hospital resources. You bypassed standard procurement protocols and terminated a highly profitable, fully functioning vendor contract solely to execute a personal vendetta on behalf of your daughter's boyfriend. That is a direct violation of your fiduciary duty to this hospital network. Dr. Thorne's face flushed a deep, angry red. You have no authority here. He snapped, his voice losing its theatrical calm. Vanguard Medical Tech is a holding company. You are merely a recruiter. I will not sit here and listen to your ridiculous accusations. We are terminating your contract and you are going to leave this building immediately. I am not merely a recruiter, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. I opened the first manila folder and extracted a certified corporate document, sliding it down the polished table toward him. I am the silent majority shareholder of Vanguard Medical Tech. I have owned the controlling stake for the past 3 years. And as of last week, my holding company purchased the specific network debt that manages your residency programs, your administrative overhead, and your executive payroll. In short, Dr. Thorne, I own this hospital. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet as the sheer magnitude of my statement crashed over the executives. Dr. Thorne stared at the certified document resting in front of him. His hands began to tremble slightly as he read the corporate structure, seeing my name clearly listed at the very top of the hierarchy. The arrogant color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. Carter, sitting in his corner chair, completely dropped his victorious smile. He uncrossed his arms, leaning forward, his eyes darting frantically between me and Dr. Thorne. He could not comprehend what was happening. The woman he thought he had destroyed was sitting at the table, calmly revealing that she controlled the financial destiny of the entire medical center. Because you have demonstrated a profound inability to separate your personal family drama from your professional obligations. I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. I am exercising my right as the majority debt holder to demand an immediate comprehensive audit of this executive board. Furthermore, any attempt to terminate my agency's staffing contract will be met with an immediate restructuring of the hospital's administrative leadership, beginning with your forced resignation, Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The other board members were entirely frozen, staring at me in terrified awe. They had ambushed a lamb and found themselves locked in a cage with a lion. But we are not quite finished, I stated, opening the second manila folder. Carter, you might want to pay close attention to this next part. I pulled out a stack of documents printed on heavy legal paper. These are formal foreclosure notices. They belong to your mother, Patricia. Carter jumped up from his chair, his face contorted in panic. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice cracking. You cannot touch my mother's house. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on him. Years ago, when your living expenses began to exceed the bounds of my initial generosity, your mother approached me. She was so incredibly confident that you would quickly become a wealthy, successful surgeon that she voluntarily put her own home up as collateral to secure an additional line of credit to fund your lifestyle. She signed the paperwork. Carter. And since you have officially triggered the acceleration and morality clauses of your primary tuition loan by publicly betraying me, all secondary loans are now immediately past due. Your mother owes me hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she does not have the liquid capital to pay me back. I am legally seizing her property today, and there is absolutely nothing you can do. Carter stared at me, all the color draining from his perfectly tanned face. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled out of water. When reality finally registered, his smug facade completely dissolved into sheer panic. "You are lying," Carter stammered, gripping his chair. "My mother would never sign away her house." "You are bluffing." I calmly extracted a sheet of paper from the folder and held it up. The bold text of the property deed transfer was visible, but Patricia's signature at the bottom made Carter freeze. "I never bluff, Carter," I stated calmly. "3 years ago, your mother begged for a secondary line of credit to cover your excessive spending, assuring me your future salary would cover the debt. She willingly signed the collateral agreement. Because you breached your primary contract, that secondary debt is active. Tomorrow morning, the bank will formally serve her the eviction notice." Carter slumped back in his chair. With his own assets frozen and his mother's house gone, he was facing absolute financial ruin before his career even began. "Enough of this theatrical nonsense," Dr. Thorne bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. "This is a private meeting, not a venue for your domestic grievances. I do not care what fabricated debt you claim to hold. You are a terminated vendor, and your ridiculous assertions about Vanguard Medical Tech are nothing but a desperate attempt to save your failing business." Dr. Thorne turned his angry gaze toward the older man sitting to his right. This was Marcus Sterling, the chief executive officer of St. Luke's. Sterling had remained entirely silent, watching with a guarded expression. "Marcus, call building security immediately." Dr. Thorne demanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Have this woman escorted off the premises. I will not have my time wasted by a disgruntled recruiter spinning fairy tales about corporate buyouts." Marcus Sterling reached for the phone but hesitated, studying my unbothered posture. "I highly advise against calling security, Mr. Sterling," I said smoothly. "It would be incredibly embarrassing to forcefully remove the person who just saved this entire institution from public bankruptcy." "You are delusional," Dr. Thorne scoffed. "St. Luke's is a pillar of the medical community. We do not need saving from you." I ignored him and reached into my briefcase. I extracted the master contract bound in heavy cardstock and sealed with the official gold crest of Vanguard Medical Tech. I placed the thick binding flat against the polished mahogany table and pushed it forward. The heavy document slid smoothly across the long expanse of wood, coming to a gentle stop directly in front of Marcus Sterling. The massive room went deathly quiet. Dr. Thorne stopped talking, his eyes fixed on the paper sitting in front of his superior. I folded my hands and looked directly into Marcus Sterling's eyes. "You have been operating under a severe misconception, gentlemen." I began, my voice perfectly level and echoing clearly in the dead silent room. "I do not run a temp agency. The boutique recruiting firm you attempted to terminate today is merely a minor subsidiary in my portfolio. I am the chief executive officer and the sole controlling entity of Vanguard Medical Tech." Marcus Sterling slowly reached out and opened the thick binding. The crisp rustle of heavy paper was the only sound in the boardroom. Over the past 6 months, I continued ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. I have monitored the severe financial hemorrhaging of this hospital network. I watched as your executive board approved frivolous expansions and bloated administrative salaries, while your operational debt reached critical, unsustainable levels. You were exactly 3 weeks away from defaulting on your primary corporate loans and facing a highly publicized catastrophic bankruptcy. Marcus Sterling turned the first page, his eyes darting across the complex legal text and financial figures. A thin sheen of sweat began to form on his forehead. "Vanguard Medical Tech is the holding company that just finalized the $40 million bailout of St. Luke's Medical Center," I stated. "We purchased your failing debt. We acquired your structural liabilities. We own the financial infrastructure of your residency programs, your administrative overhead, and your executive payroll. We provided the exact capital injection this hospital needed to keep its doors open." I shifted my gaze from the reading CEO back to the man sitting at the head of the table. Dr. Thorne was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the aggressive fire in his eyes rapidly giving way to a dawning, terrifying realization. "I am not your vendor, Dr. Thorne," I stated, my voice dropping to a cold, unforgiving whisper that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. As of 8 o'clock this morning, when the final financial transfers cleared the Federal Reserve, I am the majority stakeholder of this entire hospital network. I am your boss. The boardroom remained locked in a state of absolute paralysis. The wealthy, powerful executives who had spent the last 20 minutes looking at me with undisguised contempt were now staring at me with genuine, undisguised terror. Dr. Thorne slowly turned his head toward Marcus Sterling. The arrogant surgeon was searching for a lifeline, searching for someone to tell him this was all a massive, elaborate bluff. Marcus, Dr. Thorne whispered, his voice hoarse and stripped of all its previous bravado. Marcus, tell me she is lying. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Marcus Sterling did not answer immediately. He flipped to the final page of the master contract. He stared at the certified bank transfer receipts, the federal acquisition approvals, and the notarized corporate signatures. He stared at the indisputable proof that a $40 million transaction had indeed transferred the ownership of their debt to Vanguard Medical Tech, and that Isabella's signature was the authorizing force behind it all. The CEO swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his crisp white collar. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the visible sweat from his brow. When he finally looked up, his face was ashen, drained of all color and authority. He slowly slid the document toward Dr. Thorne. She is not lying, Harrison. Marcus Sterling said, his voice trembling slightly. The documents are completely authentic. The routing numbers match our internal bailout deposits perfectly. The acquisition is finalized and legally binding. She holds the majority debt. Vanguard Medical Tech is the controlling entity of St. Luke's. Dr. Thorne stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. His hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning stark white. The reality of his situation had finally crashed down upon him. He had just spent the last half hour viciously insulting, threatening, and attempting to illegally fire the woman who now held the absolute power to dismantle his career, strip him of his board seat, and ruin his professional legacy with a single phone call. The arrogant titan of the medical community had been reduced to a trembling subordinate in his own boardroom. I let the heavy, deafening silence stretch for another moment. Then I smoothly shifted my focus. I turned away from the defeated executives, pivoting my body slightly until my lethal gaze locked entirely on Carter. Carter sat completely paralyzed in his oversized leather chair, staring at me in sheer disbelief. The smug, victorious glow that had illuminated his face just minutes ago had vanished, completely replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of absolute panic. He looked toward Dr. Thorne for salvation, but the older man was staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, rendered entirely impotent by the sudden and catastrophic shift in power. The remaining executives in the room sat in stunned, rigid silence, their eyes darting between Marcus Sterling and me. They were holding their collective breath, waiting for my next move, fully recognizing that the corporate hierarchy they had relied upon for decades had been shattered forever. I did not rush the moment. I allowed the heavy, suffocating silence to press down on Carter's shoulders, letting him feel the inescapable reality of his situation. He had confidently walked into this room, expecting to watch my professional execution, and instead, he was sitting in the front row of his own absolute destruction. I reached down to the carpeted floor, lifted my heavy leather briefcase, and placed it squarely in the center of the massive, gleaming boardroom table. The brass locks clicked open with a sharp, heavy metallic snap that echoed very loudly against the high ceiling. I reached inside and retrieved a thick stack of identical navy blue folders. I handed the stack to the executive seated immediately to my left, instructing him with a brief nod to pass them down the line. One by one, each and every stunned member of the silent board received a closed file. I kept the final folder for myself, placing it neatly on the glass surface directly in front of my chair. Marcus Sterling opened his blue folder very hesitantly, as if he expected the documents to contain a live ticking explosive. The other executives followed suit, the rustling of crisp paper filling the stagnant, dead, tense air of the massive boardroom. I waited until every executive had their eyes firmly fixed on the first page of the contents. I slowly folded my hands together, projecting my voice with calm, absolute authority. As the new managing partner of this hospital, I conducted a highly detailed, routine, comprehensive audit of all incoming residents matched to St. Luke's Medical Center. It is standard operating procedure for Vanguard Medical Tech to assess the structural integrity and potential liabilities of our new financial investments. A hospital's reputation is built on the competence, honesty, and integrity of its medical staff. We cannot afford to have our patients treated by individuals who lack the basic qualifications, ethical grounding, or intellectual capacity required to safely practice medicine. Carter swallowed very hard, his throat clicking in the quiet room. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning stark white against the dark leather. He knew exactly what his files contained. He knew he had spent the last 5 years hiding his academic inadequacy behind my financial support and his mother's relentless, deceitful maneuvering. Please turn your attention to Section A of the provided audit, I instructed, my gaze sweeping across the table. The executives flipped the heavy paper pages in unison. You will find certified copies of Carter's original unedited medical school transcripts. I obtained these directly from the university's secure digital archives, using Vanguard's corporate auditing authority. If you cross-reference these original documents with the transcripts Carter submitted to this hospital during the residency match process, you will immediately notice an undeniable discrepancy. Marcus Sterling pushed his reading glasses further up the bridge of his nose, his eyes scanning the columns of data. A low gasp escaped a female executive as she processed the numbers. The submitted transcripts were heavily altered, I stated. He failed his pharmacology rotations twice. He barely passed his clinical evaluations. His scores in advanced anatomy were well below the required threshold for a surgical residency at any Tier 1 hospital. The documents he presented to your selection committee were thoroughly and maliciously falsified to inflate his grade point average and mask a history of academic failure. He is not a prodigy. He is a profound liability to this institution. Dr. Thorne finally looked up from the table, his face contorting with genuine professional horror. The realization that he had championed a fraud was a direct blow to his fragile ego. But it gets worse. I continued, my gaze never leaving Carter's terrified face. Turn to Section B. A residency match at St. Luke's requires impeccable letters of recommendation from distinguished attending physicians. Carter's file contains 3 supposedly glowing endorsements. However, our corporate investigators conducted a thorough, relentless background check on the origins of these letters. The executives turned the pages, their expressions rapidly shifting from shock to absolute disgust. Those letters were not earned through excellence, I explained. They were purchased. Carter's mother, Patricia, utilized her extensive connections at her elite country club to secure those endorsements. She leveraged social debts, called in personal favors, and in one documented instance, outright forged the signature of a retired chief of surgery who had not practiced in over a decade. Every single recommendation in his file is a fabricated piece of fiction designed to secure him a position he never legitimately deserved. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from intimidated silence to palpable, radiating outrage. The executives who had spent decades building their own legitimate careers through grueling hard work were now looking at Carter with pure, unadulterated contempt. He was no longer the promising young doctor engaged to the chairman's daughter. He was a fraud, a cheat, and a massive legal threat to their institution. Carter tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing in a desperate attempt to formulate a defense, but the crushing weight of the irrefutable evidence had completely paralyzed his vocal cords. He looked toward Dr. Thorne, silently begging for an intervention, but Thorne deliberately averted his eyes, leaning away from Carter, as if failure were a contagious disease. I closed my folder and placed my hands flat on the mahogany. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the finality of the moment wash over the room. I looked directly into Carter's eyes, watching the last remnants of his arrogant illusion shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Carter's residency match is a liability to my hospital, I stated, my voice cold and steady. I am formally revoking it, effective immediately. The finality of the statement severed the last remaining thread of Carter's sanity. The pristine, carefully constructed image he had relied upon his entire life completely disintegrated. He lost his mind. His face flushed a dark, violent crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. With a guttural, animalistic roar, he launched himself out of the visitor chair. He lunged across the polished mahogany table, his hands outstretched like claws, screaming violently as he frantically scrambled toward me, knocking over two heavy leather chairs and sending several crystal water glasses shattering loudly to the floor. He never reached me. The heavy double doors of the boardroom burst open. The hospital's own security guards, the exact same large, imposing men that Dr. Thorne had originally hired to intimidate me, charged into the room. They moved with brutal efficiency, intercepting Carter mid-lunge. They tackled him hard against the table, pinning his arms behind his back as he thrashed and screamed obscenities. The guards swiftly dragged him backward, lifting him off his feet, and hauled him kicking and screaming out of the room. The boardroom remained frozen after Carter disappeared through the heavy doors. His screams faded down the executive corridor, but the damage he had left behind seemed to thicken the air. No one reached for a glass of water. No one shuffled paperwork. Even the executives who had arrived prepared to condemn me were now staring at the blue folders as if the pages might burn their fingers. Dr. Thorne sat motionless at the head of the table. His face had lost the polished authority he wore so easily in public. He no longer looked like the untouchable chief of surgery, whose signature could end careers. He looked like a man calculating the distance between scandal and survival. Marcus Sterling was the first to move. He closed his folder with deliberate care, then turned toward Thorne. "Harrison," he said, his voice low but unmistakably sharp, "you personally sponsored this resident." Dr. Thorne's jaw tightened. "I sponsored him based on the information provided." "The falsified information provided by the man engaged to your daughter," another board member said. The accusation landed with brutal precision. Thorne's eyes flicked toward me, then back to the executives around the table. He wanted to argue. He wanted to protect his pride. But the evidence was everywhere: the forged recommendations, the altered transcripts, Carter's connection to Brittany, and the retaliatory attempt to terminate my agency. Every piece pointed back to his judgment. Worse, every piece now sat in front of the controlling financial authority of the hospital. I allowed the silence to work for me. Men like Thorne were used to filling rooms with their voices. Silence made them feel exposed. Finally, I spoke. "Dr. Thorne, your personal attachment to Carter Evans has already created a material risk to this hospital. If you want to prevent that risk from spreading further, you have one." His eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" "You will remove him from this institution publicly and permanently. No quiet resignation, no protected exit, no private recommendation to another program, no family favor hidden behind administrative language." A female executive at the far end of the table nodded slowly. "If those documents are accurate, he cannot remain associated with St. Luke's in any capacity." "They are accurate," Marcus Sterling said grimly. Dr. Thorne looked at Marcus as if expecting support, but the CEO's expression offered none. Sterling was already thinking like an executive in crisis. He did not care about Carter's humiliation. He cared about containment. The door opened slightly. A security supervisor stepped in, waiting for instructions. He must have heard enough from the hallway to know that the situation had moved far beyond a simple disturbance. I looked at Thorne. "Make the call." His hand hovered over his phone. For the first time since I had entered the boardroom, he hesitated like a man who understood that power had changed hands. Then he unlocked the screen and dialed. "Brittany," he said. When the call connected, his voice strained but controlled. "Come to the main lobby immediately. Do not ask questions. Do not call Carter. Just come down now." He ended the call and stood. "I will handle it," he said. "No," I replied. "You will handle it where the staff can see that St. Luke's rejects fraud. Carter entered this hospital through a lie. He leaves it in public." A muscle in his cheek twitched, but he did not protest. He understood exactly what I was doing. I was forcing him to choose between protecting Carter and protecting himself. There was no version of this day where he could do both. Marcus Sterling stood as well. Security will escort him off the property. Good, I said. And after that, this board will begin a full review of Dr. Thorne's role in the original selection process. Thorne's face hardened, but the fight had already gone out of him. He walked toward the door with the stiff, furious posture of a man being marched toward his own disgrace. Through the glass wall overlooking the atrium, I could see movement several floors below. Carter had been dragged into the lobby, his white coat twisted, his hair disheveled, his face still red from rage. Staff members were already slowing down to stare. Nurses whispered. Residents stood frozen near the elevators. The perfect young doctor had become a spectacle. A few moments later, Brittany appeared at the top of the grand staircase. She descended quickly, her expression irritated at first, then confused as she saw the crowd, the security guards and Carter standing alone in the middle of the lobby. Carter saw her and lunged toward Hope. "Brittany," he pleaded, reaching for her hands, "you have to listen to me. Isabella fabricated everything. She is trying to punish me because I left her. Your father can fix this. Tell him to fix this." Brittany looked past him to Dr. Thorne. Her father's answer was cold enough to cut through the entire lobby. "He lied," Thorne said. "The transcripts were altered. The recommendations were fraudulent. Your engagement to him has endangered my position and embarrassed this hospital. He is not a surgeon. He is not a resident. He is finished." The color drained from Carter's face. Brittany stared at him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the handsome future surgeon she had been promised, not as the charming man who could elevate her social image, but as a fraud who had used her name the same way he had used my money. "You made me look stupid," she whispered. "Brittany, please." Her hand moved before he could finish. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger and threw it at his chest. The diamond struck his white coat, bounced once against the marble, and rolled to a stop near the shoes of a stunned nurse. "I never want to see you again," she said. "If you come near my family, I will make sure you are treated like exactly what you are." Security grabbed Carter before he could answer. This time he did not fight. He seemed hollow, as if every lie that had held him upright had been ripped out at once. They marched him through the revolving doors and pushed him onto the sidewalk outside St. Luke's. Only when the glass doors closed behind him did his phone begin to ring. He stared at the unknown number with shaking hands and answered. A calm, automated voice filled his ear, announcing that his tuition assistance loan had entered immediate default due to breach of contract. The grace period was revoked. The principal penalties and legal fees were now due in full. Carter sank onto the curb, the phone slipping from his hand. For the first time in his life, no one was coming to rescue him. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut abruptly, cutting off the frantic, humiliated screams echoing from the hallway as the security guards dragged Carter away. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with a toxic mixture of shock, terror, and sudden, desperate survival. Dr. Thorne remained entirely motionless at the head of the long table, his face a sickening shade of gray. The horrifying reality of his situation had finally pierced his monumental arrogance. He had staked his family's reputation and his professional judgment on a massive documented fraud. Carter's falsified transcripts and forged letters of recommendation were not just a personal embarrassment. They were a direct, undeniable liability to St. Luke's Medical Center. And sitting directly across from him, holding the absolute authority to terminate his career, was the woman he had spent the last hour actively trying to destroy. I watched the frantic calculations flash behind his eyes. The surgical precision of my corporate trap left him with zero leverage. If he attempted to defend Carter or showed even a single trace of defiance against my authority, I would immediately initiate executive restructuring protocols. He would lose his prestigious position, his massive salary, and his board seat before the afternoon concluded. He was a cornered animal, and his only remaining option was absolute immediate capitulation. Dr. Thorne slowly pushed his leather chair back and stood up. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed the front of his tailored suit jacket, utterly refusing to meet my lethal gaze. He turned his attention toward the other executives who were watching him with identical expressions of horrified anticipation. He needed to salvage whatever microscopic shred of authority he had left. He cleared his throat, his voice entirely stripped of its previous commanding resonance. "Gentlemen," Dr. Thorne stated his words tight and strained, "the evidence presented today by Vanguard Medical Tech regarding the incoming resident is deeply disturbing and unequivocally clear. St. Luke's cannot tolerate academic fraud or ethical violations within our programs. I fully support the immediate revocation of his match. Furthermore, I must attend to an urgent, highly personal matter regarding this unacceptable breach of trust." He did not wait for a response from his peers. He did not offer me a single word of apology or acknowledgement. He simply turned and marched out of the boardroom, his pace frantic and desperate. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly on the table. The public execution was over. The true fallout was just beginning. Down in the pristine, brightly lit main lobby of the hospital, the scene was rapidly deteriorating into a public spectacle. Carter had managed to wrestle himself free from the security guards near the main entrance, his white resident coat torn and his hair wildly disheveled. He stood near the grand glass doors, his chest heaving as he frantically dialed his phone. He was desperately trying to reach Brittany, praying he could spin a fabricated story to control the damage before the truth reached her ears. He never got the chance. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Dr. Thorne marched into the lobby, his face flushed with unadulterated rage. Trailing closely behind him was Brittany. Dr. Thorne had practically dragged her down from the surgical observation deck the absolute second he left the boardroom. Carter's face lit up with a pathetic, desperate flash of hope. He stumbled forward, his hands reaching out toward his fiancée. "Brittany, thank God," Carter gasped, his voice cracking. "You have to listen to me. Isabella is insane. She ambushed the board meeting. She presented fabricated documents to try and ruin my career out of pure jealousy. You cannot believe a single word she says. It is all a massive lie." Brittany immediately stopped walking. She looked right past Carter, her angry eyes locking onto her father. Dr. Thorne's expression was carved from solid stone. He was glaring at him with absolute, unmasked revulsion. "He is the liar, Brittany." Dr. Thorne stated, his voice echoing sharply across the crowded hospital lobby, drawing the attention of passing nurses and administrators. His entire medical school transcript is a heavily altered fraud. His recommendation letters were forged by his mother. He is not a resident at this hospital. His match has been formally and permanently revoked by the holding company that currently owns our debt. He is a liability, and he has completely humiliated this family. Carter froze, the desperate color draining from his face once again. He looked at Brittany, his eyes wide and pleading. "Brittany, please. You know me. I love you. We are getting married." Brittany stared at him. The romantic illusion she had built around him completely shattered in an instant. She did not see a brilliant, handsome future surgeon standing before her. She saw a pathetic, manipulative liar who had used her status to secure a position he never deserved. She saw a man who had just publicly humiliated her father and jeopardized their family's standing in the elite medical community. The affection in her eyes turned to pure, visceral disgust. "You are repulsive," Brittany sneered, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. She reached down and grabbed his wrist forcibly, peeling his desperate fingers away from her arm. "You actually thought you could use my family. You thought you could forge your way into my father's hospital and play the role of a brilliant doctor while making me look like an absolute fool." Carter stumbled backward, shaking his head frantically. "No, Brittany, please. I can explain everything. I did it for us. I did it so we could have the perfect life together. I am going to be a great surgeon. You are not going to be a surgeon." Brittany stated, her voice icy and loud enough for the gathering crowd of hospital staff to hear perfectly. "You are a fraud. You are nothing but a pathetic, lying loser who rode on the coattails of your ex-girlfriend until she finally cut you off. You have absolutely zero status, zero career, and zero future." She reached for her left hand and aggressively pulled the heavy diamond engagement ring from her finger. The ring that I had paid for. The ring representing the ultimate betrayal of my devotion. She held it up for a fraction of a second before throwing it directly at Carter's chest. The platinum band hit him squarely, bouncing off his coat and clattering loudly against the marble floor. It rolled a few feet away, coming to a dead stop near a large potted plant. Carter stared down at the discarded jewelry, completely paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his entire world. "Do not ever contact me again," Brittany demanded, stepping back to stand firmly beside her father. "If you ever come near me, or if you ever step foot inside this hospital again, my father will have you arrested for trespassing. Are we completely clear?" She turned on her heel and walked away. The hospital security guards stepped forward once again, their patience exhausted. They grabbed Carter by the arms much more forcefully this time and marched him toward the exit. He offered absolutely no physical resistance. All the arrogant fight had been drained completely out of him. They pushed him forcefully through the heavy glass doors and out into the afternoon air. As Carter sits on this curb outside the hospital, his phone rings. It's an automated message from Isabella's legal team. The $50,000 tuition loan is in default and the debt has been called in. The automated voice clicked off, followed by a sterile dial tone that seemed to mock the absolute devastation radiating through Carter's exhausted body. He sat frozen on the concrete curb, the cell phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering against the pavement. The $50,000 tuition loan was only the tip of the iceberg. That massive debt was merely the first domino to fall in a meticulously calculated chain reaction of financial ruin. Without Carter's lucrative residency salary to prop them up, the entire financial house of cards collapsed. For the past 3 years, his mother had been frantically borrowing against every single asset she owned, convinced his surgical career would serve as their ultimate salvation. She had leveraged her home, her luxury vehicles, and her pristine social standing on the absolute certainty of his success. Now that future was completely obliterated, and the crushing weight of their combined debt was crashing down upon them with merciless speed. The corporate mechanisms of Vanguard Medical Tech moved with terrifying, unforgiving efficiency. Within 24 hours of Carter's termination and the formal revocation of his medical match, the secondary line of credit Patricia had so willingly signed for was legally breached. Patricia defaulted on the collateral loans instantly. The banking institutions, alerted to the severe change in their clients' sudden financial stability, acted immediately to mitigate their own massive corporate losses. Patricia Evans was standing in the opulent, sunlit foyer of her sprawling suburban home when the reality of her son's failure finally arrived at her front door. She had spent the entire morning frantically leaving voicemails for Carter, demanding to know why Dr. Thorne had suddenly stopped returning her calls regarding the upcoming wedding arrangements. She was holding a crystal vase of freshly cut hydrangeas when she saw the heavy tow trucks pull into her wide circular driveway. She dropped the vase. The thick crystal shattered against the expensive hardwood floor water and crushed petals spilling out everywhere as she ran toward the heavy oak front doors. She threw the doors open, demanding to know what was happening, her shrill voice echoing across the manicured front lawn. The repossession agents ignored her completely. They moved with quiet, practiced precision, hooking the heavy steel chains to the axles of her pristine silver Mercedes convertible and the sleek black Range Rover Carter had been driving. Patricia rushed down the brick steps, her designer slippers slipping on the pavement, screaming at the men to stop. She threatened to call the police. She threatened to sue their company. The lead agent simply handed her a thick manila envelope containing the immediate legal seizure orders, perfectly validated by the bank, due to a catastrophic default on the primary collateral loan. Patricia watched in absolute hyperventilating horror as the tow trucks pulled away, dragging the very physical manifestations of her wealth and status down the street. But the vehicles were only the beginning. By the following afternoon, a representative from the bank arrived to formally serve the foreclosure notices. The bank was legally seizing the property. She was given exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the locks would be forcibly changed and her remaining possessions auctioned off to cover the remaining balance. Desperate, cornered, and suffocating under the weight of her sudden poverty, Patricia turned to the only lifeline she believed she had left. She began calling her incredibly wealthy friends from the country club, the exact same women she had gossiped with, the same women she had relentlessly bragged to about her son's brilliant future. She begged for temporary loans, pleading for just enough cash to satisfy the bank and halt the foreclosure. The rejections were swift, cold, and universally identical. News of Carter's massive, humiliating fraud had already spread through the elite social circles like wildfire. Patricia went from being the respected mother of a future chief of surgery to a complete social pariah in a matter of hours. Stripped of her wealth and country club status, she was completely isolated. Her membership was quietly suspended, pending review of unpaid dues, and her friends entirely stopped answering her frantic calls. Reduced to a state of absolute total desperation, Patricia realized she had nowhere else to turn. The reality that Isabella, the quiet, unassuming woman she had viciously mocked and insulted for years, was the sole architect of her destruction, finally registered in her panicked mind. Isabella held the debt. Isabella controlled the hospital. Isabella held the absolute power to stop the bank from taking her home. Driven by pure, unfiltered terror, Patricia called a cheap local taxi and directed the driver to the address listed on the foreclosure documents. She arrived at the towering glass and steel corporate headquarters of Vanguard Medical Tech in the financial district. The building was a massive, imposing monument to modern corporate power, its gleaming facade reflecting the afternoon sun. Patricia stumbled out of the taxi, her appearance a stark, jarring contrast to her usual polished elegance. Her expensive hair was unkempt and messy, her designer blouse was wrinkled, and her eyes were swollen and red from days of constant hysterical crying. She pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the expansive minimalist lobby. The space was intimidatingly quiet, featuring polished white marble floors, towering indoor water features, and a massive curved security desk manned by 3 guards in immaculate dark suits. Patricia rushed toward the front desk, her hands trembling wildly as she gripped the cold marble counter. "I need to see Isabella," Patricia demanded, her voice cracking completely, lacking the condescending authority she usually wielded against service workers. "I need to speak to the chief executive officer right now. It is an absolute emergency." The lead security guard looked at her with cool, detached professionalism. He typed a few keys on his computer terminal, not bothering to look up. "Do you have a scheduled appointment, ma'am?" he asked evenly. "No, I do not have an appointment," Patricia gasped, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "You do not understand. I am Patricia Evans, Carter's mother. Isabella knows me. She was going to marry my son. You need to call her office and tell her I am here. Tell her I am begging her to give me 5 minutes of her time." "Ma'am, I cannot authorize access to the executive floors without a verified appointment," the guard stated, his tone remaining perfectly flat. "I am going to have to ask you to step away from the desk and exit the building. If you would like to request a meeting, you can do so through the corporate portal." The polite corporate refusal shattered Patricia's remaining composure. She slapped her hands down hard against the marble counter. "No!" Patricia screamed, the shrill, frantic sound echoing loudly across the cavernous lobby. "You cannot turn me away. She is taking my house. She is ruining my life. I have to talk to her. Isabella. Isabella, please." Patricia turned away from the desk, looking frantically toward the private elevators. Gone was the arrogant woman from the graduation party. She sank to her knees right there on the pristine white marble, burying her face in her hands. She was now crying hysterically in the lobby, begging Isabella to forgive the $50,000 debt and stop the foreclosure because they are practically family. A soft chime suddenly echoed loudly. Isabella stepped out of the private elevator, looking down at the weeping woman who had publicly mocked her just weeks prior. Back inside Vanguard headquarters, the legal consequences continued moving without emotion. That was the part Patricia had never understood about real power. It did not need to shout. It did not need to posture in country club dining rooms or threaten service workers with imaginary influence. Real power arrived in sealed envelopes, bank notifications, court filings, and quiet signatures placed at the bottom of documents. No amount of screaming could undo. By the time Patricia reached the Vanguard building, her old life had already collapsed behind her. The Mercedes was gone. The Range Rover was gone. The foreclosure notice sat on the marble console table of her foyer like a death certificate for the identity she had spent decades constructing. Her friends had stopped answering. The country club had placed her membership under review. Even the women who once laughed with her over champagne had become suddenly unreachable, as if humiliation were contagious. Taxi in front of the glass tower, looking nothing like the woman who had once stood in a jeweled gown and called Isabella a temporary utility. Her hair was loose and uneven. Her makeup had cracked beneath her eyes. One heel had scraped badly against the pavement, forcing her to limp as she crossed the wide stone entrance. The lobby doors opened with a soft mechanical sigh. Inside, everything was calm. That calm terrified her. The white marble floors were spotless. The security desk curved like a wall between her desperation and the private elevators beyond it. Executives moved through the space in tailored suits, speaking in low, controlled voices. No one stared at her with the admiration she was used to demanding. No one recognized her importance. No one cared who her son had almost become. Patricia rushed to the front desk. "I need to see Isabella," she said, breathless. "Tell her Patricia Evans is here. Tell her this is an emergency." The guard looked up from his monitor. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but she knows me. She was engaged to my son." The guard's expression did not change. "The executive floors are restricted. Without a verified appointment, I cannot allow access." Patricia pressed both hands against the counter, her fingers trembling against the polished stone. "You do not understand. She is taking my house. She has to stop this. I just need 5 minutes. I can provide the corporate portal address if you would like to request a meeting." The sentence broke something inside her. All the manners, all the borrowed elegance, all the social authority she had spent her life performing, cracked apart in the middle of that pristine lobby. "No," she cried, her voice rising. "You are not listening to me. I am family. We are practically family. She cannot do this to us." Several people turned. Patricia saw the private elevators beyond the security checkpoint and moved toward them before the guard could stop her. Two security officers stepped into her path. She tried to push past them, but they caught her by the arms with practiced restraint. "Ma'am, step back. I have to talk to her," Patricia screamed. "Isabella! Isabella, please." Her voice echoed up through the high glass ceiling. The humiliation was complete. This was not the country club where her name could open doors. This was not Carter's graduation gala, where she could command guards and mock a woman in front of wealthy guests. This was Isabella's building, Isabella's company, Isabella's world. Patricia's knees weakened. She sank onto the marble floor, clutching at one of the guards as if physical collapse might accomplish what cruelty no longer could. "Please," she sobbed. "Tell her I am sorry. Tell her I was wrong. Tell her I will sign anything. I just need my home." The elevator chimed. The sound cut through the lobby with surgical precision. The private doors opened and Isabella stepped out. For a moment, Patricia forgot how to breathe. That was the last time Isabella allowed Patricia Evans to stand close enough to beg. The security team removed her from the Vanguard lobby within minutes, and the building returned to its usual calm as if nothing meaningful had happened. That was what hurt Patricia most. Her collapse did not shake the walls. Her tears did not stop the elevators. Her ruined name did not echo through the company. She had become a minor disturbance in a place built by the woman she once dismissed. Isabella did not follow the guards. She did not look back through the glass doors. She simply returned to the private elevator and let the steel doors close between her present and everything Patricia represented. By evening, the Evans family had been reduced to paperwork. Carter's debt file moved to collections. Patricia's foreclosure advanced through the bank. Dr. Thorne's conduct entered the first stage of internal review. None of it required Isabella's anger anymore. The systems she controlled were doing exactly what they had been designed to do. For the first time in years, there was no emotional battle left to fight. Only consequences. And Isabella had no intention of wasting another breath explaining consequences to people who had mistaken her patience for weakness. 6 months passed with breathtaking speed. Over those 6 months, Vanguard Medical Tech experienced a period of explosive, unprecedented growth. Isabella poured every ounce of her relentless energy into expanding her corporate footprint, securing lucrative international contracts, and revolutionizing medical supply chain logistics. But while Isabella was busy building an empire, Carter was desperately clawing through the wreckage of his shattered life, consumed by a toxic, festering bitterness. Stripped of his medical career, Carter was relegated to working grueling, low-paying manual labor jobs just to survive. Unable to accept responsibility for his own catastrophic failures, he decided to launch one final desperate strike against the woman who had bested him. He reached out to a sleazy, bottom-feeding local journalist known for sensationalist hit pieces. Carter provided the reporter with the deceptively edited eviction videos. He spun a pathetic, entirely fabricated sob story, painting himself as the hardworking, devoted medical student who had been ruthlessly discarded and financially ruined by a cold, calculating corporate tyrant. The local media, always hungry for a scandalous narrative involving a prominent local billionaire, eagerly resurrected the deceptively edited eviction videos Carter posted. The sensational headlines were designed to inflict maximum reputational damage, aiming to paint Isabella as a ruthless, heartless monster who stepped on the little guy to climb the corporate ladder. He vastly underestimated her. Isabella was sitting at the head of her polished boardroom table when the media alert flashed across her tablet. Her executive team shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, anticipating an emotional outburst or a panicked demand for immediate damage control. Instead, Isabella simply smiled. She calmly picked up her phone and dialed her elite public relations team. "We are not going to hide Isabella," instructed her lead PR director, her voice ringing with absolute, unshakable confidence. "We are going to completely obliterate his narrative with the truth. Bring me the files." However, Isabella's PR team masterfully flipped the narrative within a matter of hours. By that afternoon, they released the true, unvarnished timeline of her incredible self-made success alongside the undeniable, devastating proof of Carter's extensive fraud. The PR team provided respected top-tier journalists with the comprehensive financial records proving that Isabella had single-handedly funded Carter's entire lifestyle and medical school tuition while working herself to the bone. But the absolute fatal blow to Carter's pathetic smear campaign was the release of his heavily altered medical school transcripts and the forged letters of recommendation. The undeniable documentation of his academic deception was published alongside sworn statements from the executive board of St. Luke's Medical Center, confirming that Carter Evans had been formally expelled for extreme ethical violations and severe fraud. The vicious smear campaign completely backfired with spectacular, overwhelming force. The public, initially swayed by Carter's deceptive sob story, immediately turned on him the absolute second the undeniable facts were presented. Carter was mercilessly dragged across social media platforms, publicly branded as a pathetic, manipulative fraud who had attempted to destroy the brilliant woman who had supported him for years. He was permanently blacklisted from any remaining professional opportunities in the city, his name a toxic punchline in both medical and corporate circles. Conversely, the intense media spotlight turned Isabella into a celebrated icon of female empowerment and corporate resilience. The public was absolutely captivated by her incredible story. She was no longer just a successful executive. She was a brilliant, self-made powerhouse who had survived years of financial and emotional exploitation only to rise up, conquer her abusers, and build a massive corporate empire entirely on her own terms. She became a symbol of strength and uncompromising integrity to millions of women. The positive media exposure generated an unprecedented wave of incredibly lucrative business opportunities. Hospitals and medical conglomerates across the country rushed to partner with Vanguard Medical Tech, eager to associate their brands with a chief executive known for her brilliant mind and absolute ethical fortitude. Within a few short weeks of the media frenzy, Vanguard Medical Tech literally doubled its profits, securing massive contracts that solidified its position as a dominant, unstoppable force in the healthcare industry. Isabella's triumph was absolute. She was featured on the glossy cover of the nation's leading business magazines, her sharp, confident gaze staring out from newsstands across the country. The accompanying articles lauded her strategic genius, her unwavering resilience, and her remarkable ability to turn adversity into unprecedented corporate success. She had entirely eclipsed the toxic family she left behind, rendering them completely irrelevant and utterly forgotten in the shadow of her towering achievements. The evening air was crisp and refreshing as Isabella stood in the expansive master suite of her penthouse, looking at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The transformation was profound. She was wearing a stunning backless emerald gown that moved like liquid silk, a physical manifestation of her hard-won freedom and absolute power. Her life was completely unrecognizable from the terrible day of the country club ambush. She was no longer the exhausted, unappreciated girlfriend, desperately trying to hold a broken relationship together. She was a titan, a conqueror, a woman who held the world firmly in the palm of her hand. She slowly reached for a delicate diamond tennis bracelet, fastening it securely around her wrist. Tonight was not just another corporate event. Tonight, Isabella heads out to a fabulous celebratory dinner, stepping into the private elevator with a genuine radiant smile. The story of Isabella Carter and Patricia serves as a profound reminder that true power never resides in the hands of those who seek to manipulate and exploit others for their own gain. For years, Isabella endured the condescension and cruelty of a family that saw her only as a stepping stone, a convenient financial resource to be drained to fuel their own manufactured prestige. Yet her ultimate victory was not achieved through vindictive screaming matches or desperate pleas for validation from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. Instead, her triumph was born from absolute, unbreakable self-reliance and the quiet surgical execution of her own boundaries. When faced with ultimate betrayal, Isabella did not allow the toxic narrative of her abusers to define her reality. She stripped away the emotional noise and responded with the cold, undeniable facts of her own hard work and resilience. Patricia and Carter built their entire existence on a fragile foundation of lies, entitlement, and the financial exploitation of others. When that foundation inevitably collapsed under the weight of the truth, they had absolutely nothing left to stand on. Isabella, conversely, had built an empire on a bedrock of unyielding integrity and personal strength. This narrative teaches us that we cannot control the cruelty or selfishness of those around us, but we retain absolute authority over how we respond to them. We do not have to accept the diminishing roles toxic people attempt to assign us. Walking away from abuse and building a life of profound, untouchable success is the ultimate form of justice. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own success story from the ground up? Share your experience in the comments below, and please hit the like and subscribe buttons to join our community for more stories of incredible personal triumphs and unapologetic resilience.